We'll give it like 2 more minutes, then we'll get started. So, an exciting topic today. Happy you were able to join us also.
Yeah, no, it'll be fun. Always a pleasure chatting with you.
I'm trying to think how many years it's been since we met.
Oh, I don't know,
3 years?
3, 4 years, something like that. Yeah, yeah. It's been good, and seeing your team and company grow over the years been fantastic.
Yeah. We're a little bit larger now than we used to be.
Yeah, much larger.
Indeed. All right, so let's get started, and then I see some more people are joining now. Also, they'll join as we kind of get into it. So first of all, thank you everybody for joining today. Today's topic is how to know when it's time to build a risk management program. So one of the things that we've noticed is that companies that are in like growth mode or mid-market enterprises that are slowly but surely maturing are finding themselves a little bit at a disadvantage when it comes to the governance, risk, and compliance areas of their organization, especially around information security. And in a world where cyber risk has moved to the top of operational risk and compliance, in particular privacy, but not just, in other areas as well. That's something that we see is hitting the mid-market quite a bit. And with that, I thought we would include a very special guest and one of the smartest guys I know in information security, Gary Chen. Gary, welcome.
Well, thanks for inviting me on the show, Yair. Pleasure to be here, and thanks for the very, very kind introduction.
My pleasure. I'm not done with it. 1 second. So this is Gary's back. A little bit of background about Gary. So Gary and I know each other for a good few years already. Have become both professional and personal good friends. But more important, Gary's background is he's an information security management specialist who's focused most of his career on helping businesses stay secure and meet compliance obligations. From an education standpoint, Gary has a BS in electrical engineering and computer science from MIT. And he holds 4 other security certifications, but I shortened that so we wouldn't spend too much time in reading those out because they're very long. But let's just say that Gary is a very smart guy. And Gary worked in dozens of countries, deployed security solutions to multiple state agencies. He's built information security programs for large companies as well as smaller ones. And he's mentored cybersecurity startups, and that's actually where we met him. So he's given a lot of really good advice that personally has helped me in my career. And that I'm super excited to have him here, giving us some more information, from his experience and knowledge. So maybe a few stats I'll start with, Gary, and then we'll jump into the conversation itself. I researched the topic of information security programs and just looked a little bit at how many executives think their organizations are well prepared for cyber risk. And the number was 16%. So 84% of executives do not think that their organizations are well prepared. And that was something, out of a McKinsey study around the cyber posture and the security there that, gave us that stat. More than 75% of executives report that their organizations have either no or very little methods of cyber to address cyber risk. Looking at 87% of organizations see tech risk management as a siloed reactive process rather than an organization-wide function. I think all these stats are kind of similar at the end. They're really big numbers on the fact that the maturity of the market is just not there yet. And I think one of the biggest questions, that's what we're going to address today, is when does an organization get started? But before we go into that, I'm going to actually go to the personal side because I love your life story, Gary, and I want you to share it with our viewers. Can you tell us a little bit more about your unique journey as a cybersecurity expert?
Sure. Well, as a kid, I've just always liked technology, and more specifically, I like breaking things. So, just break things down, understand how they all work. And I think my first sort of security, opportunity just came up. I was just searching for different types of jobs, and I ended up working for a company that did a lot of anti-fraud systems. So that was really just a lot of fun, for state agencies, just all the stuff that people do in the background, to do security, en masse. Very interesting. And that's where I got really excited about security. And, from there, my journey continued into information security and and I guess talking with a lot of different companies also. That's kind of what I've been doing was between anti-fraud and information security.
Very cool. Yeah. So fun beginning of breaking things. Maybe moving segueing over to those years of experience. How's the risk and threat landscape evolved in your eyes?
So it's definitely gotten more complex. I think that's really complex is the word. So, 10 years, 20 years ago, IoT devices, Internet of Things just wasn't a thing. But now I've got a thermostat, connected to the internet. I've got the Nest. You've got hackable cars now. Like I could, you've got teams of researchers, looking at ways of exploiting things, whether, wirelessly or plugging things in. Cyber warfare between companies, or rather not companies, but countries. Just so many things that are different today than it was a while back on the complexity scale would be what I would think is just phenomenal. Stuxnet, not to just give on and on examples, SolarWinds, Orion, that recent hack, all of that stuff is just pretty incredible. And along with that complexity also makes it much more difficult to find qualified people, of course. So if you're on the defense side, trying to hire for the right people becomes incredibly hard.
Yeah, that HR piece is a huge challenge in the market, probably an opportunity as well for some, but we see that ourselves and we see that across the market that there's a huge gap in talent there. But let's bring it down from the Stuxnet and from the state, nation state and government level to the mid-sized market, right? So if we look at companies in the mid-market, what are the challenges that you see that are a little bit more specific to that mid-market?
Sure. I think that from that perspective, it's going to be the budget. So, usually these companies are in the growth stage and they're trying to please their investors, right? They just had just finished a series, or maybe they just are just starting to finally get some clients and trying to show that they're growing. And so, of course, you're going to spend more money trying to get more customers and show that growth so that you can get that multiple so that you can exit. Or whatever the goal is, right? But usually it's about growth, and so you don't really put as much money into information security, and that could be a mistake depending upon the organization. But that's usually it. It's no budget because it's not prioritized.
Yeah, no. So budget definitely is something we see across the board. So let's say if we take that to the next step, which is when is the right time then, because you have that balance of the budget, and then when you need it, you probably need it from day one always, but that's not possible because of that budget limitation. So what is the right time to start thinking about building a risk management program?
So I would say a couple of things. The first is, if you have to meet some sort of compliance, right? So compliance, it could be the law, it could be a regulation, or it could be, simply compliance with, some big company wants to buy your stuff and they require you to fill out a security questionnaire that says that you have security. This is becoming more and more common nowadays, where you just are required, to have a security program, or, your clients aren't going to be able to buy from you. And so I would say the first time is if you have any compliance needs that you have to do, and we can talk about that if you want. The second time that I think that, you should actually have something is if you look at it and you say, if I had a catastrophe and I'm not sure that my team could get back up again, right? So it's a lot. Yes, it is expensive, potentially to put in, some mitigation things. But if you're like, hey, if I had a single ransomware event and now I know that I will never be able to recover, well, you probably should spend that, 5, 10, 1,000, 100,000, whatever it is to, stop that. And by the way, I just want to make a mention. I know that when I say expensive, sometimes people say, how expensive is it? Obviously, it depends on your org, but it really doesn't have to be that much, right? Like I've talked to a lot of orgs and just said, hey, just do these 10 things and pretty much they're free. Or, you could go all the way to the other side, which is spend hundreds of thousands of dollars, right? So it really doesn't have to be that expensive. It just has to be relative to what you're willing to absorb if a catastrophe were to happen.
Yeah, so I think that's the way also where the risk management space comes into play here, and that's a little bit of the world that we're in, which is helping you both quantify, prioritize, and then mitigate your risks. Because people ask me sometimes, how do I get rid of all my risks? And the answer is that there is no way to get rid of all your risks, right? It's all about risk management. It's about prioritizing, because if you weren't limited in budget, you might be able to get rid of a lot of those risks. but you're always limited in budget. And even when you're not limited that much in budget, there still is a limit to what you can put in place as a safeguard without, impeding on the operational excellence of the organization or all kinds of things you're trying to achieve. So it's always a balance of powers there. And that's something that I think is where organizations struggle. But that's exactly why I think that having a risk management program in place is super important, because if you have that mechanism in place, it's also a little bit future-proofing yourself. You're not going to be stuck in a place where every time there's a new threat or attack or something happens, we have to revamp our whole program. That program needs to be agile in a way where it can react to those type of changing environment. Because we know cyber, like every day we can have a new thing. Maybe I'll throw, just is there any recent breaches that you've seen in the market that that you find that could be interesting, that really highlight that challenge that mid-market entities are facing today? We've seen it actually, but in Israel there have been a bunch of recent attacks that got a lot of headlines. One was with a large insurance company here. And the truth is they get large headlines not necessarily because they're so sophisticated, but more because the attackers kind of use the media to create more pressure. So they start releasing stuff, to the media on purpose to show how bad the attack is, even if it's not necessarily the worst attack ever. But that being said, any recent attacks that come to mind that that you think kind of highlight this challenge in the mid-market or in general?
Sure. I think that ransomware has definitely been, a hot topic. And if you haven't heard about that, probably every week for the past year, you've been living underneath a rock. So I would say for the mid-market, I think ransomware is probably about right. And then there are some supply chain attacks that have been very recent, but I don't know that the mid-market team or companies are as interested in that at the moment.
Yeah, so I mean that SolarWinds probably is a little bit higher up in the tiers, but so SolarWinds we've actually touched on quite a bit in this segment and in the show in the past, and certainly talked a lot about the supply chain and vendor risk as a whole being an area that has not been addressed well. So put aside the SolarWinds attack, there's definitely a need for quantification risk around your vendors. But let's jump in actually to the tools and kind of advice that you have. So just looking at your experience in the world, what do you think would be some really good practical steps and next things that our viewers should be doing from a information security perspective?
Sure. So just to give a little bit of background first, and then I'll share some more information. I've talked with dozens and dozens of companies, small to mid, about their information security programs and kind of what they need to do. And my initial approach, and I'm going to tell you, it failed completely, but I want to explain it because I think most people would do it this way, was to go in and look at it from a framework perspective, and then and then just basically lay out, here are the 10,000 things you have to do, and by the way, it's going to go cost you a whole bunch of money. And in most of those cases, nobody really wanted to buy anything or do anything about it, right? Beyond do some sort of assessment. And so what I've actually done over the time is specifically for this market, put together a sheet which you'll which will come out with this webinar, like in the show notes and in a follow-up email. But these are what I found was that, people will actually do the things that are on this page. So after talking with many companies, and I hope your viewership, finds this valuable. These are the 12 things that if you go and do, like you can do today and do at fairly limited cost, and it's going to be really, really effective. And so what I would suggest is to just sort of go through it. We don't have time to talk through all here on the show today, but hopefully it's mostly self-explanatory. Once you do these 12 items, then you're ready to go do that sort of broader self-assessment. And then, and I know, of course, you can take the Centraleyes sort of free trial to help you with that. But basically, I would start with here. I do these 12 things and then do an assessment.
Yeah, so that's really good practical steps there, and we'll include that. I'll mention at the end. We'll include that as a follow-up to all the viewers, and also in a link below. So that's really good. But you mentioned security frameworks as well. So just talking about that, and we've touched on that in the past as well. But why not just make your own? Like if when an organization faces this decision, should I adopt NIST? Should I adopt CIS Top 20, ISO? Some are saying, and I've heard this before, I have a group of controls I put together. Why not just use my own?
So first off, I think that you need to sort of self-evaluate and determine whether you have the expertise to even build your own. The frameworks that are out there were built by people dedicated to making frameworks. They have a lot of experience. They've taken a lot of expert advice from outside of those committees. Let's assume that you still think that you might have a better framework than they come up with. The problem is that if you go to court, and you say, hey, let's say that you got breached and someone sued you, and you've got two different groups. One company comes in and says, hey, I did this according to NIST CSF, or I did this according to, whatever standard you want to, whatever standard that they did. And by the way, 10,000 other organizations do that, and then we got breached, unfortunately. That's a pretty strong case for showing that you weren't negligent. But you've got organization B that goes in and says, hey, I came up with my own framework. I think that I'm, super smart. And so therefore I've done it this way. And it's, I'm not using any standard because I'm better than that. And then I got breached. Then, from a third party perspective, they're probably not going to give it as much weight as the first organization that said they did it according to an industry standard. So you're just really protecting yourself. Even if you do have a better framework, it's not going to stand up nearly as well in a court of law if you are sued than if you used a standard, even if that standard is worse than what you have.
Yeah, so that's a great point. And I think that what we see a very common practice is organizations adopting like a NIST CSF or a CIS top 20 and then making it their own. So they use that as the backbone, and then they'll adjust, they'll exclude some things, they'll add some specific controls that are specific to their organization. And then I think then it'll actually achieve both goals, right? You can create your own, but it's based on a public standard, which, like you said, was made by some of the smartest people on earth. And then you're covered legally, but you're also making it very relevant to your organization. And maybe taking that point, what you just mentioned now around what not to do when it comes to a framework, what other common mistakes do you see being made by organizations when it comes to setting up their information security program?
Sure. So I think one of the most common mistakes is relying too much on policy. So I see this a lot with organizations that don't want to spend the money. Is they will spend probably, 1 or 2 days pulling down policies that you can download for free from other organizations. First off, they don't really understand the nuance of what they're downloading. They simply downloading something that looks superficially good to them, but they're not really the specialist. Then they basically say, hey, everybody needs to go follow this, right? And I'll tell you a funny story with one organization. I told the IT person, I said, hey, by the way, I'm able to log into your FTP server. I don't know your credentials, but I'm able to do it because I can bypass it in this particular way and download all of the files that you have for all of your clients. And his response was, Gary, yeah, you should have read the policy. You shouldn't do that. and so I was like, yeah, but you asked me to look at your security. So, but regardless of that, I don't think that you're trying to protect yourself against me. I think you're trying to protect yourself against the hackers who probably don't care about your policy, frankly.
Right.
But that is what I usually see. Is I usually see people just write policy and they're like, hey, I'll sue them afterwards. Well, you're not really going to. That's just not going to happen.
Yeah, I think the policy needs to have a much more practical sense. First of all, that it can be enforced properly, but it's meant to be there for you to put safeguards up so people can, access those items, and not that they shouldn't. They shouldn't no matter what, but that's not what's going to enforce policy, right? You need to put those controls in place to properly, block access to those certain items, whether it's physical or virtual access or things like that. I didn't mention at the beginning, but if anybody wants to add questions, please feel free to bring in. I know that I saw that 1 or 2 already came in, but just going to put that out there that you are welcome to post any questions to Q&A box, and we'll try to get to as many as possible. Let's start maybe with just the first one here. Let's take a look. When would you wait with building a risk management program, and why?
Sure. So I think I would probably either wait or not build one if I didn't have anything sensitive. So if all I'm doing is putting up things that I'm going to be publishing for, on the internet for free anyway, why would I waste money sort of protecting that, right? So one is if I don't really have sensitive data. And the second is if the investment is really more expensive than sort of the loss of the thing, or if I'm going to go out of business because I need to do that. Now, I would argue at that point that you're probably just didn't get the right investment portfolio. You're buying too many things, because I think that, for the most part, even my list of 12 items, I think all of that stuff actually is free. So really that shouldn't be an issue. But I would say if the cost of the cure was more expensive than actually getting sick, then obviously you wouldn't want to do it.
Yeah, I think that's probably where small companies often struggle, right? Because they might be a brick and mortar shop or something that's not so large. They might also not have so much sensitive data, but they might be heavily reliant on online orders or as well, or just email, right? And that's often something that could cripple a business, but the investment there outweighs, right, the the actual potential loss. So I think that balance is important. That being said, I think following the 12 steps, most of those don't cost a lot of money. So if something none at all. So they're definitely trying to, I think, implement those as many as possible is super helpful, even for a tiny business, definitely for a mid-sized business, which usually the investment will not outweigh the value. Let's read one more question over here. So how does a company's organizational structure impact its risk management program? And what's your approach towards building it?
Sure. So I would say, so org structure to me is sort of like the people and kind of where they report and so on and so forth. So I would say whether or not they have someone dedicated to security tells you a lot about what they consider to be their risk posture. So if they obviously if they have someone dedicated to security, often in large organizations it'll be called the CISO, Chief Information Security Officer. Midsize, they might just call it the security specialist or something else. But that would be the first thing that I would look at. And then the second is I would look at where in the organizational structure it was, and not to go through the infinite number of possibilities, but just as an example, if this person is reporting up through the legal and compliance team, then all of a sudden, that the security group is really going to be compliance based. So they're not going to be security based. So for example, if NIST says that you have to have 8-character passwords, we already know in the security company, the security market, that's really easy to crack. But someone working in the compliance might just say, well, in that case, you just need 8 characters. But if you're working for a security, if security is going up through a different group, say the CSO, the Chief Security Officer, or maybe IT, then maybe they make it 12 characters, because, that's from a security perspective, right? So, I've seen them I've seen the security person report up to risk management, which looks at it from a risk perspective, IT, which looks at it very IT centric, just all sorts of different things. But that really has a significant impact on what the person focuses on.
Yeah, and then you just remind me also a little bit of the risk versus compliance debate when people want to understand, like, well, what's the difference at the end? Because they're both supposed to protect you, really. I always think about the analogy of, like, if you go into your local pharmacy and they have those like protected drugs that are behind the key and lock on the shelf there with that like clear plastic cover. So from a compliance perspective, you're covered, right? Because they're behind the key and lock, you're good to go. But then the guy puts his arm around from the back of the shelf and pulls out the drugs, and you're certainly not secure. And that's kind of the difference, right? You want to put something around back there also, even though from a compliance perspective you've checked the box. So I think that's a really good point of being able to balance those two. We'll get one last question here. She just came in, and then we'll move over to another piece here. I actually see 2 questions come in. So from Stephanie, what is your thoughts on building a program for risk evaluation and management of items that have already been identified as risks? So not full control assessment or possible risk scenario type tracking.
So say that again. So so you want to evaluate the risks of things that were already identified?
Yeah, so what are the thoughts on building yeah, she said, yeah, okay. I love the live chat. Yes.
So I guess it depends, right? If you believe that the list is comprehensive, then that's perfect, right? So just evaluate those risks that are there. If you if the list, but if the list of items is not comprehensive, then I think that you definitely want to complete that gap first. Did that answer the question?
I think an answer, I'll add to that also that like, I think that, running a risk assessment is still important, I think, because having some kind of framework that makes sure you've checked all the boxes might show you that there's a gap between the risks that you've identified to the risks you should have identified. So I wouldn't skip over a control assessment, in my opinion, but there are more narrow frameworks which you can use for that. In our platform, actually, we've developed a different like kind of tiers of assessment. Even for NIST, we have something called the NIST critical view, and that brings it down to around 50 controls so that you can get started quicker and at least have a good kind of lay of the land there of, did we cover all the critical controls? And then from there, you'll see if you have any big gaps or not. But I think once you have those risks on that risk register that you're managing, at that point, it's more about maintaining that and then obviously adding or removing things that come up over time. So thank you for that question. And now let's jump over to a new piece that we're going to add here, which is I have a personal question. It's called the Flash 5. So 5 questions I'm going to throw at you pretty quickly. And they're more personal just to get to know you a little more, and then we'll close up the session. So are you ready?
That sounds good.
All right. So interesting book. What is the most interesting book, article, or podcast you've read or listened to lately?
So I really enjoyed Sandworm. So that talks about cyber warfare, Russia, Ukraine. It's written by Wired author Andy Greenberg. So that's a really fun book.
Your idea of fun is exciting. What's your idea of a perfect day or a dream vacation?
Oh, I just like traveling the world. So just going to different places, seeing things that I haven't done before. I went whether it's safari, snorkeling, more adventurous, or whether it's just more cultural, going to, I don't know, see some sort of place somewhere. It's just sort of fun. But definitely different cultures.
I'm pretty sure
I need to go to where you are.
Yeah, I'll come out to Tel Aviv. It's definitely exciting and also a pretty good spot from a COVID perspective. But I'm trying to think about all the times I called you at the wrong hours of the day because you were not in the US where I thought you were, and you were somewhere else where it was the middle of the
Yeah, well, right now I'm going to be in the US for indefinitely. So we'll see.
That is correct. Okay, if you weren't an InfoSec expert, what would you be?
Well, I already kind of do it. It's my hobby. So I'm a magician and mentalist. So I love doing that. It's a lot of fun.
That's awesome. And last one, when you're not dealing with InfoSec, what do you like to do with your spare time?
Well, right now, I'm really kind of playing video games because we can't really go out. But otherwise, when we get to go out, maybe go play some tennis or hike or something like that. Just get out a little bit. But yeah.
That is great, and good to see the personal side as well. So just to mention that our next webinar will be on May 19th, and the topic and guest will be announced soon, so we'll let you all know. Everybody who's registered here will get a link today to download the sheet that Gary shared earlier. So really appreciate you guys all taking part today and joining us. Last thing I'll mention is that anybody who's interested in taking a look at Centraleyes can visit our website for a free trial there. And at this point, really want to thank everybody for their time today. Gary, thank you so much for joining us. It's been, as always, fun talking, and I look forward to seeing everybody in our next show.
Thank you.